Sister drops her kids off due to an emergency, but I find out on social media it's for a child-free wedding. And her boyfriend doesn't even know she's a mom. Hey everyone, I have been quietly hanging around on Reddit for a while, and I have never really shared my own story here, but today, I just feel the need to let everything out. So, my sister, let's call her Miranda, has been a constant source of stress in my life. We never got along. She's quite manipulative and tends to display narcissistic traits. You see, Miranda was born prematurely, which seemed to trigger a protective streak in my parents. Unfortunately, this meant that throughout my life, I often felt overlooked. They would forget to attend my school plays or basketball games and even neglected to pick me up from them. Birthday gifts were another sore point. While Miranda received thoughtful presents from our parents which would make her smile, I would receive gifts like books or teddy bears which I didn't even like. It's been a consistent theme of feeling overshadowed and neglected by my own sister. Dealing with my parents' wrongdoings was one thing, but my sister took it to another level, reveling in their favoritism. She would exploit their bias against me, like the time she tore my favorite dress to shreds while I was asleep just because a guy she had a crush on had asked me out instead of her. I was horrified and couldn't hold back the tears because I really loved the dress. When I reported it to my parents and they confronted her, she immediately played the victim card, crying and claiming she liked the guy first and that I was knowingly doing this to her since I hate her. To my dismay, my parents felt sorry for her after her sob story and suggested me to avoid guys that my sister had a crush on to spare her feelings. It felt incredibly unjust since it wasn't even my fault that the guy liked me. In another instance, I put in a lot of effort to persuade my parents to take me to Six Flags for my birthday since I was an adventurous kid. However, my sister got wind of it and decided she wanted to go to Six Flags for her birthday as well. Because her birthday came before mine, my parents gave in to her request. She didn't even sit on half of the rides and I knew she chose this just to spite me. As a result, for my birthday, my parents took me out to our usual restaurant spot for a birthday dinner. I was so disappointed with them, but my parents told me that there was no point in going to Six Flags again in 1 year. When we started to grow up, Miranda just got worse with me. She would always give me backhanded compliments like "your face looks better with your glasses" or "you have a boy crush? I thought you were a lesbian." Growing up, I always tried not to stand out too much. However, unlike me, Miranda was everyone's favorite. She pretended to be kind and helpful to everyone, but behind closed doors was an absolute nightmare to me. She was sometimes nice to me only when she needed something from me, and after getting what she wanted, she would go back to ignoring me or bullying me. Her expertise in making me feel insecure extended beyond my looks to the people I dated. At 17, I had my first boyfriend, but Miranda managed to plant doubts in my mind about him, telling me how he was too good looking for me and that he would eventually break up with me, so it was better if I broke up with him first. Every time my boyfriend would come over to visit me, she would get very close to him or try to touch his arms and laugh forcefully. Understandably, my boyfriend at that time was quite uncomfortable. After a few months of Miranda planting doubts in my head, I decided to break up with him. Now when I look back, I understand it was completely wrong for me to treat him that way since he seemed to be a genuinely nice guy. Later, as I pursued engineering in college in a different state, I would return home for holidays only to be subjected to more of Miranda's sly and undermining comments. The toxic atmosphere continued to persist. At 25, Miranda met her husband Dave and they both decided to get married after 2 years of dating. She announced to everyone's surprise her upcoming nuptials with Dave, which was a shock to everyone since she had been dating other guys on the down low and some of us knew about it. However, we were happy that she was finally settling down with a decent guy. Anyways, Miranda decided to designate me to be her maid of honor. My parents were overjoyed at the news that I was going to be a part of the wedding, while I had the completely opposite reaction. I knew that being her mo wasn't going to be easy, and I was proved right. Miranda consistently used this position as a means to control and manipulate me. She would frequently threaten to demote or remove me from the role if I did anything that she didn't like, making the entire experience stressful. Whenever she sought my opinion, I, true to my nature, would provide an honest answer. However, each time, she would explode, deflect blame onto me, and engage in yelling fits. Faced with her volatile reactions, I adopted a strategy of staying silent to avoid saying anything that might escalate the situation further. I simply couldn't tolerate the verbal abuse and preferred to keep the peace. One day at lunch, we were discussing wedding plans, and I simply asked whether the mo will be wearing a different dress, just to get a better idea of her vision. She started yelling, saying I was making everything about me by assuming I was still the mo. We moved on to overnight guests and where they would sleep. My mom said it would be a good idea to book Airbnbs well in advance, and I agreed. My sister completely lost it, saying she'd had this conversation with her fiancé already, and how they would be booking hotel rooms, and if we wanted Airbnbs then we could book them on our own. Then she kept yelling at me for not using my brain enough and saying things like how I should discuss with her before agreeing to whatever others want, since I am her mo and I basically work for her. I shut down trying to defuse the situation, so then she went on about how I'm being negative and trying to have an attitude. My mom tried to interrupt, but she talked over her and kept saying how she did not want to deal with such an immature mo like me and how I needed to do better. At this point, I am just quietly taking it since I just want her to stop yelling. Eventually, she decided it was time to leave, intending to head back to her apartment and for me to return home. As we reached the car, we sat in the parking lot, and she continued yelling at me for another 10 minutes, rehashing the same grievances. At that moment, all I wanted was to escape the situation, but my car was a 20-minute walk away, leaving me with no immediate way to leave. Eventually, the wedding day arrived, and while the ceremony itself went relatively well, my sister, Miranda, managed to find reasons to fight with me over trivial matters during the reception. She would openly yell at me in front of everyone, making the atmosphere uncomfortable and strained. I noticed her glaring at me between the festivities, whether it was about the music selection or the waitstaff not meeting her standards for serving drinks. When it was my turn to give the speech, I stood up, hoping to share heartfelt words. However, Miranda gestured impatiently for me to get it over with. Later, she confronted me, criticizing my speech for delving into her childhood. According to her, I was intentionally trying to embarrass her in front of her in-laws. I was crushed because everyone else seemed to appreciate my speech, and even our parents had no complaints. The morning after the wedding, as the chaos finally settled, I realized the extent of the anxiety I had been feeling for the past couple of months, and it was all because of her. I finally realized that she had been the problem all along my entire life. I wish I could have been bold enough to drop out of the wedding, however I knew my family would have blamed me. Now that the nightmare was over, I could finally shift my focus to my career. Eventually, a few months later, I met my current boyfriend, Tom. As we started dating and decided to move in together after a year of dating, my parents were happy for me, however my sister expressed her disapproval to me, claiming that Tom was too nerdy. In her eyes, he was just a computer geek. However, the truth was, that Tom worked in IT and earned 3 times what I did. She had no idea about any of this and I honestly didn't care. I was in love with this guy regardless of what she thought. One day my life took an unexpected turn when my sister announced at a family dinner that she was pregnant. Now if you are wondering how this affected me at all, well, my sister announced next how she couldn't wait to see me become an aunt because apparently, she was going to need my help a lot during this tough time. I was shaken by her words. She was an adult who was going to have a child, and instead of asking her own husband or our parents for help, she expected me to babysit her child. You see, there had never been any children around me, so I had zero experience with them. I have honestly always felt totally alienated from kids and have never felt any desire to be around them. I was quite happy and at peace with the fact that I didn't want to have children. Hence her words really freaked me out. I felt kinda trapped in that moment. I knew she would find some way to force me to babysit her child, especially because I have a work-from-home job which would allow her full advantage to drop off her child whenever she wanted to. There was no boundary when it came to her. If I would try to establish one, my parents would come to her defense. When my sister had her first child, I occasionally took care of her, and it didn't bother me much. Since her husband worked the night shift and she had a day job, I was mainly there to look after the child while he could grab a few hours of sleep. I was never entirely on my own with the kid, and the first time I babysat, she was already 6 months old, making it a bit more manageable for me. Unfortunately, this arrangement didn't remain as occasional as it started. Over time, I ended up babysitting more frequently, and my sister would often criticize my babysitting approach. I would be trying to work when I suddenly received a call from my sister or my mother inquiring about my weekend plans. If I mentioned having no plans, they would declare that I was going to my sister's so she could take a break, and that was the end of the conversation. Their requests started making me feel like I had a secondary job where I worked, yet I was never paid anything in return. Now you would expect that my sister was at least grateful for it. But nope, she never was. Every time I would go back home, she would call my mom and complain about what I did while looking after her child. Apparently, I wasn't changing the diaper properly or feeding the baby in the correct way, just really petty things that bother the hell out of me, especially since I was doing her a favor. Do you now understand how manipulative she was? My sister and I were clearly not close, and she should have been grateful that I was looking out for her, yet she would be nice to my face but then go behind my back and strain our relationship even more. After that, I got really pissed. This started to affect my mental health, and Tom started to notice the same. He and I had a talk where I completely broke down. He urged me to stand up for my family. So the next time I was called for babysitting duties, I point blank refused. Miranda and Mom would call me urging me to do this for family, but I put my foot down and told them to go to hell. I felt like I had done enough and didn't want anything to do with my sister or her child ever again. I stopped all contact with my sister. She would show up at my door after calling me in vain, but I would still refuse to open up. My parents would also force me to forgive her, but eventually, they gave up when they realized that I wasn't going to budge. I would talk to my parents sometimes, but that's that. This went on for 2 years, and she went on to have another child with Dave. Last year my mom called me to tell me that Miranda and Dave were going through a divorce. This was quite unexpected. Even though I didn't want anything to do with her, I was still surprised by the news. When I pried a bit further, I found out from my mom that Miranda had been sleeping around with her coworkers. Apparently, Dave had found all these inappropriate messages on her second phone, which she would always hide from him. He had then taken all the evidence and talked with a lawyer to file for a divorce. Miranda was apparently completely blindsided by it since Dave right away handed her divorce papers. When she tried to reason with him, he told her how he knew everything. This made Miranda beg him for forgiveness, but he left her. I was quite shocked at the turn of events. Although looking back, Dave was definitely too good for her, so I am kind of glad that he is out of this mess. Now after Miranda's divorce was done, she had to move back in with our parents. I would hear complaints from them about how Miranda would stay out all night and would come home in the morning drunk and smelling of booze. She was eventually let go of her job as well because she never went to work on time. This made her turn to booze more and more. My parents would have to take care of her children while she would be out having fun. This had been going on for months. In contrast to her life, my life was going well. Tom and I adopted a dog and we are proud parents. We even bought a house together with both our names on the deed and have been slowly moving in. We have discussed the possibility of marriage soon, but there's absolutely no rush. We know that we are going to be in each other's life forever, so we are taking our sweet time. When I had a housewarming party, I did have to invite my parents. Unfortunately, without asking me, they also brought my sister and her kids with them. I was pissed seeing her, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of everyone, so I kept quiet. Tom welcomed them in and served them drinks while I glared at my parents. My dad came up to me and sheepishly told me how he didn't want to bring his sister, but our mother wanted us to reconcile and thought this would be the perfect opportunity. My sister loudly announced to her kids to go and give me a hug since I was their aunt. I smiled politely as they hugged me. Miranda then started telling me how I should be a more involved aunt since the kids hardly recognized me and how I should put in more of effort. I was grinding my teeth to stop me from saying something to embarrass her in front of everyone. Throughout the party, I noticed Miranda drinking wine continuously. She wasn't the least bit concerned about what her children were up to. Her kids, on the other hand, were extremely rowdy. They chased after my dog trying to kick it or pull his tail. They kept trying to enter our bedroom, which I had closed since I didn't want guests to enter. They even broke a vase while playing. I was reaching my boiling point and kept glancing at Miranda to see if she would tell them everything, but she didn't even care. She was drinking and laughing with no care in this world. When some of the guests wanted to do a house tour, Miranda tagged along with them. I showed everyone the place, and then when we came down to our backyard, Miranda remarked loudly that this was too big for two people and started asking questions if I was planning on having kids. This immediately piqued everybody else's interest and they looked at me expectantly. I immediately shut her down and told her how this was none of her business, but Miranda retorted back that my life choices were everyone's concern, especially as an aunt. I felt the frustration building up, but I maintained my composure in front of the guests. As the evening progressed, Miranda's intoxication level increased, and her behavior became more disruptive. She started making inappropriate comments about my relationship with Tom, implying that we were wasting our time by not getting married and having children. I could sense the discomfort in the room, but I chose to ignore her remarks. Later in the evening, when most of the guests had left, I decided it was time to address the situation. I pulled Miranda aside and confronted her about her behavior. I expressed my disappointment in her actions, especially considering the history between us. As expected, Miranda didn't take it well. She accused me of being stuck up and ungrateful for all the time she claimed I owed her for babysitting her children. My parents tried to mediate the situation, with my mother urging me to forgive Miranda once again. However, I stood firm in my decision and asked them all to leave. After this incident, I did not want to see her ever again and wanted nothing to do with my mother, who kept supporting Miranda. I thought if I didn't contact either of them, I would be fine. However, yesterday morning, there was a knock on my door that caught me off guard. When I opened it, I was met with the sight of my sister, Miranda, standing there with a desperate look on her face. She quickly explained that she was in a dire situation and needed my help. According to her, she had an emergency at work and couldn't find anyone else to look after her kids. She pleaded with me to take care of them, assuring me that it would only be for a few hours. I looked at the kids' faces and they looked sleepy and tired, and it broke my heart how she had woken them up so early just to drop them at my place. I asked her what about my parents, and she informed me that they were at our aunt's place. She told me that I could verify with them, which I later did obviously. When I told her that she could still call her ex-husband for help, she told me how he was still sleeping and wasn't picking up since he had a night job, hence she had no other option but to come to me for help. Begrudgingly, I agreed to look after the kids and she happily left. As I closed the door behind her, a mix of frustration and empathy swirled within me. I couldn't fathom the audacity of Miranda, dropping off her kids without any prior notice or consideration for my own plans. Despite my resentment, I decided to make the best of the situation for the sake of the innocent children. We played games, and watched cartoons, and I even tried to engage them in some simple arts and crafts activities. Surprisingly, they were more docile once we got to know each other, and as time passed, I started to genuinely enjoy their company. When lunchtime arrived, I realized I had no idea if the kids had any allergies, and I couldn't take any risks of giving them meals without checking with Miranda first. I dialed Miranda's number, hoping for a swift answer. However, there was no response. I tried again after some time, only to be met with her voicemail. With no other option, I decided to be direct with the kids. I explained that their mom seemed busy at work and wasn't picking up her phone. Trying not to alarm them, I gently asked if they had any known allergies or specific dislikes when it came to food. The oldest, while talking about her preference, let slip that maybe her mom was busy at the wedding, which is why she was not picking up my calls. I furrowed my brow and questioned how she knew that. She hesitated before admitting that she overheard Miranda discussing it with a friend on their drive over to my place. The pieces fell into place, and a surge of anger coursed through me. I thanked the kids for their honesty and reassured them that everything. I immediately called my parents to get to the bottom of this. After much cajoling, my mother finally admitted the truth. Miranda had indeed gone to a wedding which was supposed to be child-free with her new boyfriend, who had no idea that she was a mom to 2 kids. My mother tried to justify Miranda's actions by saying things like how men didn't like dating single mothers, so she had chosen to keep her kids a secret. However, I was furious because she had lied to me. Once again, my sister had manipulated me, exploiting my willingness to help for her own convenience. I then checked Miranda's social media to verify the information. She had posted a few stories on her Instagram from the wedding. She was smiling and day drinking. I shook my head in disappointment. As I saw her Instagram, I realized that she didn't have a single picture of her children. My sister, a mother of 2, was actively pretending to be single, denying her own children a place in her public life. Later, when Miranda came to pick up her kids, we had a huge fight. I made it clear to her that I wanted no part in her deception and warned her that the next time she left her kids with me, I would involve Child Protective Services. Miranda was pissed hearing this and started to abuse me, but Tom, who had by then returned back from office, immediately intervened and threatened to call the police on her, which led to her leaving immediately. The encounter has left me feeling drained and emotionally exhausted. I am grateful that Tom supports me. However, my mother and my aunt have reached out to me saying that I should be more sympathetic to the struggles of a single mother and how I should learn to help out my family in times of need. Ida, if I don't want to be a part of my sister's lies? Update 1. Thank you all so much for being so understanding. I have received multiple messages from strangers checking up on me and telling me their own stories about toxic family members like my sister. After going through the comments, I have also come to the conclusion that my mother is extremely toxic and continues to let my sister walk all over me. Clearly, she continues to favor my sister over me, which is quite unfair since she is the messed up one. I plan on having a talk with her soon. I did call my aunt and ask her regarding her version of the events, and it turns out that my mother never mentioned the whole story to my aunt, so I did the favor. After my aunt found out how Miranda lied to me and forced me to babysit and how she has been hiding her kids from her boyfriend, she apologized to me and told me that she would speak to my mom. I don't know what conversation they had, but my mother sent me a message saying how I should not involve my aunt in our personal matters and how I should not throw my sister under the bus. It is exhausting how much my mother can come up with ridiculous excuses to justify my sister's behavior yet never actually reprimand her for anything. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. Despite my efforts to distance myself from Miranda, the family tensions have escalated. My mother has continued to pressure me to forgive Miranda and participate in her life by babysitting her kids. She even started to emotionally blackmail me about how she and Dad were getting older and Miranda was going to be the only family left for me. I decided to have a candid conversation with her and asked her to meet up with me separately. I warned them to not bring up Miranda with her and she agreed. I met my mother at a quiet cafe, hoping for a civil and honest conversation. As we settled into our seats, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the difficult discussion ahead. I began by expressing my love for her and my dad and my desire to maintain a healthy relationship with them. I acknowledged her concerns about growing older and the importance of family unity. However, I emphasized that my well-being was crucial for any meaningful relationship, including the one I shared with her. I explained the emotional toll Miranda's manipulations had taken on me over the years and how I needed to prioritize my mental health. My mother, visibly conflicted, listened as I recounted instances of Miranda's toxic behavior since our childhood and how it had affected my life. I shared my experiences of feeling overlooked, manipulated, and taken advantage of, hoping to convey the gravity of the situation. As I spoke, I could see a mix of emotions on her face, from guilt to realization. The conversation took an unexpected turn when my mother, after a thoughtful pause, admitted that she had in fact been aware of Miranda's manipulative tendencies but had chosen to ignore them to maintain some sort of family harmony. She confessed that when Miranda was born premature, she had a bit of health complications which had terrified my mother and she had grown very protective of her. This made her blind to anything that Miranda did wrong since she was just grateful that her child was doing well. Hearing this broke my heart and I pointed out to her how I was her child as well. I told her how I needed her as well while we were growing up and how it wasn't my fault that I was born perfectly healthy. I expressed empathy for the difficult position she found herself in, but I urged her to talk to Miranda, otherwise her kids are going to resent her just as much as I do. I stressed that healing within the family could only occur when everyone acknowledged and addressed the issues at hand. My mother nodded in understanding, which was quite shocking for me since I never thought she would even listen to me. We discussed the importance of setting boundaries and I told her how I needed to have my space, so I was going to take some time off from her. My mother began to plead with me and told me how she hoped I would not go years without talking to her since she loved me and regretted what she had put me through. I assured her that I wouldn't and that I needed to take some time apart. Once things with my mother were resolved, I did feel much better. Later, my father also reached out to me separately, acknowledging Miranda's manipulative nature and expressing his understanding of my choice. He confessed that he regretted enabling Miranda's behavior over the years and assured me that he respected my decision to prioritize my well-being. He let me know that he was there for me whenever I needed him, which was honestly the best thing any parent can tell their child. I have cut off all contact with Miranda and installed cameras on my doorstep so if she ever pulls the same shit again, I can take legal action against her. Update 3, it's been 4 months since my last update. I have been hounded by people on Reddit to post an update. The reason I have been MIA is that I decided to get off social media and uninstalled all my apps. My mental health has improved considerably and I have also been going to therapy. I have been focusing on my own personal growth. Tom and I are still going strong. He surprised me with a proposal last month when we were having a romantic date on a beach. It was honestly so sweet to see him tremble when he went down on his knees and took out the ring. I can't believe that I am finally going to be marrying this wonderful man in a few months. I have told my parents about it, although we talk very less. My parents are extremely happy for me and adore Tom as well. I have received news that Miranda has moved out of my parents' house after my parents finally lost their patience with her when she continued to come home late after partying and drinking the whole day. She of course fought with them, but in the end, had no choice but to move out. My parents have offered to pay her 6 months rent, after which she is on her own. Dave does pay her child support money every month, but I doubt it would cover her own personal expenses. I hope for the sake of her kids that she decides to grow up and be responsible for once in her life.